The conversation you're about to hear was recorded a few hours after I recorded the latest interview episode with the younger travelers, just before the Extraordinary Travel Festival kicked off in Bangkok. This event, organized by Rick Gazarian, is about celebrating people who've taken travel to the extreme, visiting most of the world and even every single country, tackling unique challenges and expecting the unexpected. Why did you decide to come here to Bangkok for the festival?
Well, my son-in-law invited me. He didn't invite my husband. He didn't invite his wife. He invited me. And when your son-in-law asks you to do something, you do it. So I'm thrilled to be here.
So he's a traveler as well?
Yes, he's working on his numbers.
Is he ahead or behind you?
I think we're about even right now.
Oh.
He's about to surpass me, though.
Did you go to the first?
No. And that's why I'm here, because Rick and I have discussed this. I had great FOMO and fear of missing out, and I felt like I had. And so I think I was one of the first people to register for this version 2 because I felt like I'd missed out with version 1.
Yeah. This episode is on the other side of the age spectrum. Yeah, some of them are even older than me, and I'm super old. Which just goes to show that
travel is possible at any age. Your sense of adventure is just over the horizon. So, reach out and grab it.
My name's Palabo, and this is
The Radio Vagabond. Gotta keep moving.
Before we start, let me remind you that this episode is supported in part by Hotels25.com. It's a website that helps you find the best deals on hotel rooms, guest houses, and hostels all over the world. Just go to Hotels25.com and make a simple search.
You wouldn't believe how many countries there are, but there are a lot of countries if you think about it.
Welcome back to Bangkok and the Extraordinary Travel Festival. This morning I had the pleasure of sitting around this very table with 4 amazing travelers, all in their 20s. And guys, I hope I don't offend you, but none of us are in our 20s, right?
Right.
Let's just go around the table and I will say something about each of you, and you let me know if I got this somewhat right. First, Anne Lunden from Sweden. Anne has a unique background as a former ship's doctor and transport doctor for SOS International, where she helped 295 patients from around the world come back for medical treatment. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And your career took you to countless of hospitals and put you on a lot of planes. And since retiring, you've carried on with your travel adventures and has an inspiring perspective on travel and adventure after a life of helping others in critical situations. That sound good?
Yep.
Okay. Jane, from New York, but originally a Kiwi from New Zealand. Jane Eagleson has an incredible story as a veterinarian and pharmaceutical industry professional, and this curiosity has led you all over the globe, including to some truly off-the-beaten-path destinations. You were one of the first tourists in Cambodia after the fall of Pol Pot, and your journey has taken you across Central America, Africa, and even on a road trip through the Iron Curtain. And now you're retired and still volunteering on rabies vaccination campaigns in Asia and Africa.
That's right.
I've done my research. And then we have Jeanette Heitz from Lexington, Kentucky. Jeanette has been traveling for 50 years, and her story began with a move to Switzerland with her husband, a professional basketball player.
Right.
Was he tall?
He was 7 feet tall. Well, he still is alive. I said was. But
he hasn't shrunk.
He has shrunk a little bit now.
But he still dunks?
Maybe not.
Maybe not. But since then, you've visited 100 countries, and you are an avid cyclist, having biked across the Sahara and from Moscow to St. Petersburg, among other places. With your husband, you have dedicated years to volunteer work, improving communities worldwide, and has some unforgettable travel stories like something that we'll get into. I'm not gonna say that yet. We'll keep that as a secret. But it's got something to do with the president.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And finally, Jeff Casey, originally from Alaska, close to the polar circle. And now you're splitting your time. You got enough of the cold, so now you're splitting your time between Seattle and Palm Springs, depending on the weather. Right. You got enough of the snow. Your career in aviation led you to 197 regions around the world. And while your travel style is, as far as I understand, a little bit more comfortable now, you still value experiences over possessions.
That's correct. Yes,
Great.
it is.
Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
My name's Bond.
Radio Vagabond.
And I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into that whole ship's doctor and transportation doctor thing for SOS International. You help people get home to medical treatment. Is that how it works?
With the insurance that you have for the house or the flat that you have in Sweden, it's included that you get a transport back home if you turn sick when you are overseas for 35 days. If you stay more than 35 days away from your country, you are uninsured. But before that, you are insured. And if you are knocked down by a taxi, or if you get a stroke or a heart attack, or something that needs a doctor going with you, then the insurance will pay for you. But I think about 15% of all the cases that SOS are handling are psychiatric. It's people who are preferably quite normal at home, but when they go overseas and do a lot of drinking and they get into accustomed situations, things go wrong in their heads. And then the IATA, the Airline Association, they will never allow them on board. They have to walk back home to Denmark or Sweden if they are not accompanied by a doctor. So I would go there and try to get an idea if this is possible at all. And usually they have calmed down. And when we are sitting in the plane, we are going with ordinary airlines, and I always put the patient next to the window and I sit in the middle. So he has to climb over me if he gets in any way violent. But I have had all sorts of strange encounters through the years, but in the end, it has been okay. So it's really, isn't it fantastic to get full salary for traveling to all over the world?
Sounds like a dream job. Did you have a normal medical job or doctor's job before you landed this?
Yeah, I'm just an ordinary orthopedic surgeon. But then I worked on the ships. I've done that as a cruise ship's doctor for 18 years. So you can mention any illness, and I've seen it on board. Because everything is happening on a ship, and it's never boring.
No, and I've been on some cruises where I also needed to see the doctor, and I learned that, not from seeing the doctor, but I learned that it happens that people die. Because many of the cruises, they have old people, and so I guess that's a thing.
Especially if there are American guests, because if you, for example, have had severe cardiac surgery, the doctor, when you are discharged, he will tell you, now you need a bit of rehabilitation. So they go straight away to a cruise ship and think that's a good rehab time. So they bring their discharge summary from the hospital, and I just look and I say, my goodness, you left hospital just a week ago, and you are going to be on board here. But so anything can happen, and they're often very fragile people who go on cruises. If they are Americans, I think Europeans are a bit more sensible.
But I guess with that job for SOS, you got to go to some countries that most people don't really think of going to.
Yeah, because some people go for work and some people go for pleasure. And when you go for work, it could be any country in the world.
Yeah.
And when you go for pleasure, of course, being Scandinavian, it is a lot of Canary Islands. I've been there countless times, but I actually like the Canary Islands, so I never mind going there. And also the healthcare is good standard there. Some of the other countries, you can't treat Scandinavian citizens in any hospital. So often they have been transferred, like here in Thailand, for example. Yeah. They're very often transferred to the Bangkok hospitals because out in the middle of nowhere, those hospitals are not acceptable for our patients.
But they would call you and say, you need to come here to whatever and pick up a patient. But would it just be in and out for you, or did you have time on the ground?
No. Well, you need some time actually, because I have to sit down with the patient and examine him and have a long discussion of how he is. And also describe the event, what is going to happen, when we are going to change planes. And if he's a stretcher patient, it's the stretcher patient go on ordinary commercial airlines. And most people don't know that. They think they're going to be picked up by a private jet, but that's not the case. You go on ordinary planes. But then you also have to see his doctor, and you have to look at his x-rays and discuss with a treating physician. So if I have 24 hours in another country, I have to spend a lot of that time doing that. But when we are going more than 8 hours traveling, like when we go to Bangkok, we get 48 hours. But still, there's a lot to do regarding the patient that you have to attend to.
Yeah.
So
Jeff, you also had a job where you got to travel. You were working in aviation.
Right.
What were you doing there?
Well, so I wanted to go back to that ETF question if I can.
Absolutely.
I didn't go to Yerevan, but I came to Bangkok because I have two buddies that I travel with every year. And we all have birthdays in May, and so we have made it a practice for the last 20 years to choose a country that none of the three of us have been in. And so it's gotten very competitive to find a location to go to.
It gets harder, doesn't it?
Every once in a while, I'll suggest one, and it'll be like, wow, that was easy, but not generally. So last year we went to Syria. One year we went to North Korea, but when I worked at the Boeing company in charge of marketing, and so we have customers in nearly every country around the world.
Yeah.
And my job was about 85% travel. So I was used to going places that were difficult, that involved visas and things like that. So travel didn't represent an obstacle to me, but the idea of going more places. So one of these guys, it's a buddy of mine, said, well, you should try to go to every country in the world. And I'm quite close. And much to his chagrin, I'm always ahead of him because I'll think of somewhere and then off I'll go. So this year's objective was Libya, but we had visa problems, so we didn't get in.
No.
But we always seem to find something that is an obstacle and we get in. So we did Iraq that way, and Iran that way, and North Korea that way. And so my job, the impetus was my job because I was traveling so much. But then it became sort of a thing between the three of us.
Yeah. So growing up close to the Arctic Circle in Alaska, did you ever think that you were going to be seeing every corner of the globe?
Well, I remember two things. One is that I didn't like the long, dark winters.
Yeah.
And I thought I had to find a solution to that problem. Yeah. Because I didn't mind the cold so much, but the long, dark winters were very off-putting. So I thought when I get to be an adult, I'll forge my path. And so that's worked out pretty well. I don't have a problem with cold weather, but the dark I do. So I love summers up north in northern regions, or the alternate. I was in Antarctica this particular summer.
Yeah.
And so I like that.
Yeah, and me being from Denmark, I know what you're talking about because we have very long days in the summer, but the winter is, we see the sun at 8 o'clock and it's gone by the time we go home from work.
Right.
So almost every year it was like there's a specific day in the spring where it's like, oh, where have I been the last 5 months? So yeah, kind of hibernating.
So the other thing that comes with Alaska is Alaska has a large landmass. It's a third of the size of the United States.
Yeah.
With very few roads. So it was just habit for me that anywhere I was going to go, I was going to have to fly.
Yeah.
So it was second nature. I mean, some people say to me they're afraid of flying, and I think, well, how do you go anywhere? You know, it perplexes me.
Yeah. So when were you in North Korea?
North Korea, 2018.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's when it was still possible. I was there in 17, and a few Americans there as well. But it's kind of a closed place right now for Americans.
It is. It's a very interesting culture.
Yeah.
As an umbrella statement, that's probably enough.
Yeah. Can we agree that a visit to the DMZ doesn't count as a visit to North Korea?
Right. Go stay in a hotel in Pyongyang.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You are listening to the Radio Vagabond. We'll be right back.
He's the radio vagabond, moving with the wind. Every new country, a new tale to spin. Gotta keep moving, it's the only way.
You can see pictures, videos, and links and read much more on theradiovagabond.com. You can also send a few lines to Palabo and get featured on the show. Tell him where you are and what you're doing right now as you're listening to these words. Just click on Contact on theradiovagabond.com and fill out the form.
Jane, you were one of the first tourists in Cambodia after Pol Pot. Tell me about that.
Yeah, there's some interesting things about it. Firstly, it was 1989, so there was no internet.
No.
I was living in Sydney then, and I got this thing that I wanted to go to Cambodia. And so I got the Yellow Pages, and I telephoned, starting at the top, every travel agent in Sydney that I could find in the Yellow Pages, asking if they had trips there. And when I got to about number 20 or 30, they said, no, we don't, but there's an agency on the floor below us, and I think they do.
Yeah.
And so I got hold of them, and they were putting together a trip, and we had to charter a plane. And so I was saying earlier that it's...
Wow.
It was such an expensive trip that I went to a bank and borrowed money to go on it.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, is this really wise? And then when I got to Angkor Wat and there were only 9 people there.
See, that was my next question is like, did you actually go to Angkor Wat to see the sunrise without a million people?
Not the sunrise, because there was a curfew.
Okay.
And also Cambodian Air or Air Cambodia didn't have very many planes. And you were only allowed to fly there. And you weren't allowed to stay overnight. We weren't. And so we flew in the morning and we flew back in the late afternoon. So we could only have the day there.
Yeah.
And the other interesting thing about that flight was they used little laminated cards as boarding passes, and they gave them out to as many people as wanted to get on the plane. So there were standees in the aisle as well as those of us who thought we were really lucky to have a seat. But, you know, I look back now and think, how lucky could I be? There was 9 of us. There were a couple of Indian archaeologists working there. Wow. And there was a guide that had been assigned to us. And that was the total number of people on the site.
Wow.
So I didn't see the sunrise, but I have a picture of me sitting on the causeway with not a soul in sight anywhere.
That's and I bet some of the young people, when they see that picture, you had AI to remove all the people.
Probably. But it's in the end, borrowing money was one of the best things I ever did. So it was a very it's good foresight now.
Now we heard from Jeff and Ann that they had a job where they could get to travel, and you kind of did that as well, or with the rabies vaccines.
No, that the rabies is a late retirement thing for me, more or less.
Here I was thinking that I got everything wrong right here.
Not quite.
No.
But the job I worked for various pharmaceutical companies developing drugs for animals. I'm a veterinarian, so it fitted with me. And that particular job, I did a lot of travel, but not to exotic places.
No.
Exotic places was in my spare time. And then I took 2 years off and just travelled for 2 years, mostly to exotic places. So I went a lot of places that people are going now.
Yeah.
And I went 25 years ago. The stands, for example, I took a train from Moscow to Tashkent, and there were hardly any foreigners. There were 2 other foreigners on that train, I discovered when we got stopped at the border, but otherwise, when I got to Tashkent, there just weren't foreigners there. It wasn't that you couldn't go, it was that people hadn't quite got the idea that you could.
Right.
So and there were a number of places I went in that 2 years, and the gift of time, where you could take whatever time you want to go places. Doesn't matter if you stay an extra week or you leave the day you arrive because you don't like it.
Exactly.
So it all worked well. So I got to do quite a bit of travelling, and then at the end I worked as a consultant to startup companies, and startup companies don't want you with them because you cost money, so they're very happy for you to be anywhere as long as you take care of the time zone. So
Digital nomads before that was a thing.
I know. I was indeed. For 10 years I was a digital nomad, I'd rent an apartment in Venice for 2 months. So.
Well, more. When was that?
That wasn't that long ago.
Okay, so there was digital. There wasn't analog nomad.
No, that would have never worked.
I have some good friends. They started traveling 30 years ago, so before internet.
Yeah.
Or technically close to it.
Yeah.
They started their journey traveling with a fax machine.
Doesn't surprise me. I opened my Hotmail account in Cameroon. I can remember in this dial-up cafe. Yes, that was it. And a couple of guys helping me because I had no idea what this email stuff was. And I've still got that Hotmail account.
How do you make that squiggly A?
Exactly. Yeah. So I've been lucky. I've been very lucky, I think.
Yeah.
This is the Radio Vagabond podcast.
Sounds pretty good, right? That sounds great.
So you traveled by train from Moscow to Tashkent, and Jeanette, you traveled from Moscow to St. Petersburg, but not on a train.
Right, on a bicycle.
On a bicycle.
Yes.
You and the basketball player.
Yes. Now, let me clarify. When we do our bicycle trips, we always do it with a company, so that the company provides a transportation to carry our luggage. They make reservations for our hotels, and they provide a map. We did the work.
Yeah. But without a big, heavy to weigh you down.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was a little easier.
That
So
sounds
it was very eye-opening. We were in a few cities. One city, the night that we were there, they had no electricity.
Mm-hmm.
It was normal for them. The small in the countryside there was nothing, but in some of the towns they were very well developed, or some of the cities I should say, and they loved their president. But in the countryside, it was pretty dismal. They had some pretty little cottages, but I thought about their long winters, and it would be dismal.
Yeah. And then you also, and this I'd like to hear more about, cycled across the Sahara.
Well,
are you cycling in the sand?
No, my daughter
Okay,
started
good.
in Paris. She had already ridden her bicycle across the United States 3 times. So she started in Paris. I met her in Granada, Spain, with bicycles, and we rode with a company. There were 27 of us. And when you're on these trips, you ride at your own pace. So we weren't all riding together. And we rode to Dakar, Senegal, and like Mauritania, there's one highway. So we were on that highway.
Yeah.
And we slept in tents at night. One place where we slept, evidently, when we got there, we were always the last ones arriving at camp each day because I'm very slow. And evidently, they had set up camp in an area where there were landmines.
Yeah.
And so an official from the town came out that evening to warn us, do not go in these certain areas because you could step on landmines. And then he came back the next morning to see if anyone had been killed overnight from the landmines. So it was that kind of situation. Scorpion in my tent one night. One night we heard people walking around, and it was soldiers. This is in another area, but soldiers with guns just to protect us.
Yeah.
So it was interesting.
Interesting.
We were there during Ramadan.
Yeah.
And in Morocco, we were yelled at. Bottles and rocks were thrown at us because we were, women in spandex during Ramadan.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter was on a bicycle, and we passed this lone man on a lonely road. We were, of course, by ourselves at the end of the pack, and he tried to pull her over on him. So she's screaming, "Go, Mom!" So I pedaled as fast as I could, and she caught up. We got away from him, then he caught up again and tried to pull her over. And just little situations like that. I don't need to go back to Morocco, and I don't want to offend anyone by saying that. But we had situations, but now it's one of the hardest things I ever did. But I'm very glad I did it.
How long did it take?
It took her 10 weeks from the Eiffel Tower, and it took us 7 weeks once I met up with her. And I had never slept in a tent before. I had never erected a tent before, so I had to learn all of that.
Yeah. And you also do some volunteering projects?
Yes. My husband and I started out with Habitat for Humanity in 2000. And then a few years later, we decided we would do it on our own with our friends. So we founded a little group of friends, and we pick a developing country each year. And we go there, and we will do projects like build houses, repair apartments, build playgrounds, repair schools, paint schools, work in orphanages. And so we have done that for 23 years. And in January, we will go to Rwanda. In fact, he's there right now getting everything organized. He always makes an early trip to get it organized before our friends go. And 15 to 20 of us, we range in age from, my granddaughter has gone since she is 4. So at that one year, we had someone who was age 4 and someone who was age 90.
Wow.
We are all different religions. Some are no religion. And we just go and do some good.
Yeah. That's really impressive. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to dive more into some amazing travel stories and how traveling has changed over time.
Coming up later in this episode.
So one day I was backing up the Bucky, and a man with a little speaker in his ear and the vest with all the pockets and came up to me, and he had a very Georgian Southern accent and said, Ma'am, you might want to stop because you're about to run over former President Carter.
We'll be right back.
This conversation is recorded with a wireless microphone set called Nomono. It's from a Norwegian startup that's changing the game for recordings on the go. This thing is awesome. Once I record it, I connect it to their app and it automatically uploads to the cloud. With a few clicks, I can use the AI to enhance the sound quality, making it sound really top-notch, even in a noisy environment. It's incredibly easy to use, perfect for anyone wanting to capture professional audio without the hassle. If you're curious and want to learn more, check out their website at nomono.co. Give it a look, you won't be disappointed.
Hotels25.com, they're like this super-powered search engine.
It makes you think, though, how far can this go?
Like, will they be able to read our minds?
Yes.
Right. You seemed stressed yesterday.
Maybe you need a vacation.
We booked you a flight to Fiji. It's kind of cool and kind of creepy at the same time.
It is a little bit of both.
Hotels25.com. Make sure you're getting the best deal.
This is the Radio Vagabond podcast.
Let's get back to the show.
Okay, I'm here with Jeanette, Jane, and Jeff, all seasoned travelers who's been traveling a long time. Apart from the obvious, and this is a question for all of you, apart from the obvious that we didn't have Google Translate and Google Maps and tools like that back in the day, how has travel changed for you from when you started?
Hard copy plane tickets. You bought a plane ticket from a travel agent.
Yes.
And it came as hard copy.
Yeah.
Do you remember with the red ink on the back of it? Mm-hmm. And you had as many copies within the little booklet as flights you were going to take. Mm-hmm. And when they would change, they just stuck a white piece over the top and wrote over it again. But if you lost that ticket, you'd lost the flight. Mm-hmm. You know, there was no way to go back and retrieve what had been bought.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that, to me, that being able to buy a ticket online, which wasn't all that long ago, was a huge innovation, just enormous, where you weren't travelling for 5 months with this scrunched up ticket inside your money belt. You know?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
You know, I was thinking about that the other day and the paper tickets and all the things that we had to do, and I thought, how the hell did I manage all these hotel reservations with letters and confidence that when I showed up, they would have me as an incoming guest? Checking in here, she had, now this is all electronic today, she had my name, she had somebody's address in Dallas for me. She said, let me see your confirmation number. It was, and I thought, what did they do? Put it in digital soup and mix it up? Because it was very muddled. And I thought, how do they manage that? And every once in a while, I mean, and having the experience of traveled a great deal, I'll know that there's something that's not quite awry. If you can't check in online, that ought to be a red flag that you need to do something.
Yeah.
And you need to call somebody. And unfortunately, it's not like the days when people knew how things worked, because things work behind the scenes.
Yeah.
But my advice is generally traveler beware. And if you think there's a little red flag, then call and ask why you have that.
Mm-hmm.
And the other change that's different from when we had written plane tickets is we used to write out long itineraries, and then you'd check your bag to the final destination. And today, with all the airline associations and all the systems that don't speak to each other, you can't do that. You can't get a non-alliance carrier to take your bag. And when I came over this time, I was on an alliance from one to the other. And I said, so you're going to check my bag all the way to Bangkok? And she said, yes. And I said, but you can't issue me boarding passes for the last legs. She said, no, you can get those in the next stop. I consider these red flags. So I said, okay, we'll check the bags. And then as soon as I got to the next stop, I said, could you verify these bags are in your system? So we at least have that.
Yeah.
There's some checks and balances. But so many things have changed that you be diligent to the degree that you can understand what's going on and ask questions.
But has it also changed, like when you were in a country, is over-tourism very much different now than it was back in the day? Do you see any changes, or has it happened so gradual that you don't really think about that?
No, I think it's like a tidal wave. I really do. I think the days of being able to book something and wait a few weeks and then show up has completely changed. If you live in London, you can book an EasyJet ticket to Amsterdam for the weekend. You can book your hotel online, probably with a discount, really quick. Go to the airport, get a carry-on, you're off to Amsterdam. And that's a city that is just like bursting at the seams.
Yeah.
So it's so much easier to do, and especially if you're a Gen Xer or a Gen Y, you know exactly how to do all those things, and you do it right away, and you just do it on a whim. And they also value the travel experience over going out and buying retail goods. So it's very different.
What's made it so much easier is the people's knowledge of English. I think nearly every country you go to nowadays, you just try to go for the teenagers, and they all know some English. But 30 years ago, it was pure luck if you found anyone who you could communicate with in English.
We also now have luggage with 4 wheels.
And packing cells.
Oh, that's right.
Whoever invented the packing cell deserves the Nobel Prize.
The what?
The packing cell, you know,
cubes,
it's a miracle.
So one place that it really struck me that the wave of tourism had really affected it was I went to Machu Picchu probably 40 years ago, and I wrote letters and got hotels, and then when I got there, I stayed at a hotel at the base of Machu Picchu and then took the bus up. And there was a busload of people. And I recently went back with some friends, and they actually have this huge system. It's like going to Disneyland. And it was just, I was like dumbfounded. The crowd was just amazing. And they have to do crowd control to bring people in. And I thought, this is nothing like it was 40 years ago.
I was in Machu Picchu a couple of years ago, and when you talked about Angkor Wat and you being so alone there, I had the same experience at Machu Picchu. And what my trick was that I got on the first bus in the morning, and then a lot of people, they stopped to pet the llamas. I went straight to Machu Picchu. I was the first one in, and I just, because I know that it gets crowded, and it's like, oh my God, I'm all alone in Machu Picchu right now.
Yeah.
Didn't take long before people came, but I had a few minutes where it was just me.
Yeah.
It's just gone so crazy since the pandemic.
Yeah.
I was in Portugal. I've been to Portugal a few times, but I was there this summer, and I've never seen so many people. I was there during the pandemic as well. There was nobody.
I did a lot of traveling during the pandemic also, where I did, oh my God, now is the time to see things without...
But this summer it was overwhelming, the number of people who were there, because suddenly Portugal is seen as being safe and reasonably priced and pretty, and the people don't mind tourists. You know, there's all these good things. So suddenly it's absolutely heaving.
Is there any place on the planet where you see, okay, it's not as crowded now, but it might be in a few years, so now's the time to visit?
Albania.
That was exactly what I was going to say.
That was our first trip out. We were just, wanting, we wanted a country to open, and Albania opened, and they had a bicycle company that was doing tours. Yeah. So we went there for our first trip after COVID. And I think there were 35 or 40 people on our flight across the Atlantic, which was wonderful. And they were building lots of hotels. And my thought was, this will be like Croatia in 10 years. Because Croatia was kind of a well-kept secret at one point. And I think Albania, and I think Albania will be like Croatia. Yeah. But it was wonderful. What a wonderful place to go.
So beautiful.
Yeah.
Who knew?
Yeah, that was my main takeaway when I was there, and what I said so many times on the episodes I did from Albania is like, this is going to be the next big thing. So if you want to go now.
If travel is your passion, and you want escapism while still upholding your work and family responsibilities, you can travel vicariously from the comfort of your own home. This is the Radio Vagabond Podcast.
Is there anything about traveling in the old times you miss? More room in the planes?
Yeah, but the other thing, and I'm sure that everybody else here experienced it if you went on a long trip, was the whole post-response system. Where you went to a post office and they had a counter called post restant, and you go in there and say, have you got any letters for me?
Yeah.
And someone may have sent you a letter, a month ago or 6 weeks ago, on the off chance that you were passing through there, because you told them you probably would be, and that you would go to the post restaurant counter. And it was really, I'd travel for 8-10 weeks and I wouldn't actually have any communication with anybody. And suddenly you'd go to this counter and there was this letter from someone. And my mum sent me a letter. Oh, and it was really exciting when it happened.
Yeah.
So I miss that.
There's also, have you heard of the app called Touch Note?
Yeah.
Where you used to go buy a postcard, then you would have to find a stamp, and then you'd have to write the postcard and find the post office. Now there's an app where you can use one of your photos from your trip and do everything online, write your note. They will send it to the person, and you don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
They send
really
it
nice.
through the mail?
Yes, they send it through the mail.
From the UK, actually. It's
it's in the UK.
It's been available for over 10 years.
So it's wonderful.
But I still do the old way. Find the post office, find the stamps, and the postcards are very hard to find. But I send them to my godchildren, my grandchildren, and I insist that I still do it. And it's gotten harder and harder and harder to find mailboxes, to find post. And it's just like, wow.
I still see a lot of racks with postcards, but the mailboxes, I don't know what to do with it. So I'm gonna look at that Touch Note.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're very
I've got
efficient.
it on my phone too.
So post
and you can
restaurant,
you pay, like you buy a bundle of postcards in advance, put your credit card in, and then you fill out your address book on their website, and then you just click send to this person and write your note.
I'm sure my kids will appreciate
Yeah.
that. So thank you. Looking back, is there one? Is that the one?
That's the app.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can even do, like, if you go to a dinner party, you can take a photo of your host, and then you can create a thank you note and send it to your hostess afterwards. So it's very clever.
Yeah.
Convenient.
So looking back, is there one specific trip or destination that you think, okay, this was the turning point, this shaped me as the traveler I turned into being?
Mine was my trip through the Soviet Union that you mentioned. So in 1980, a friend and I drove a British car starting in the UK and went through Belgium, West Germany, East Germany, Poland, and into the USSR, which was, at that point, it was what's now Ukraine, down through Moldavia, back up to Odessa, back up to Kiev, Moscow, Leningrad, and then out to Finland, looped around there and went back to the UK. And I arranged that, it's 1980, no internet. And I remember thinking at the time, if I can do this, I can do anything.
Exactly.
And an old Renault car that I knew I have no mechanical knowledge. Guidebooks, so when we broke the fan belt, I could point to, I have broken my fan belt in the Polish phrase book. and I just remember when we actually got back to the UK thinking, if we can do this, because I was with one other person, then we can do anything.
Yeah.
And after that, I've always been confident that wherever I wanted to go, I could get there and everything would be all right.
Yeah.
So that was it for me.
Yeah. Anne, do you have anything that stands out? Something memorable?
Yeah, I made a strange trip about 12 years ago. I signed off a ship in Odessa, in Ukraine, and because the next doctor, she was from there, and that made it cheap for the company, me leaving there, she coming on. And when I left in Odessa, I know that there is a village 190 kilometers east by the river Dnieper, where it goes into the Black Sea. It's a village there called the Swedish village, where there lived about 3,000 people, and they speak Swedish there. And they have been Swedish since 1780. And to come to that village and walk around with the old ladies, and they speak Swedish to you.
Oh, they do?
Of course they do. And they told us about our king and queen, had visited them in 2008 and stayed there a couple of days. Wow. And they also got extremely emotional about that village and the old people speaking Swedish. So they have taken out of their own money and given quite a lot to the village. Yeah. And I stayed there for 3 nights, living with an old lady and looking around and they were so proud of their Swedish heritage. Yeah. And it's been like this since 1780 when Catherine the Great, she had problems with those islands that then they used to belong to Sweden, but they belong now to Estonia. And the people there, they refused to be serfs. They wanted to be free farmers. And she said, I want to get rid of those people. And at the same time, she had won a war against Turkey with lots of land, what is now in Ukraine. And she wanted to put people there who were sort of Russians and get rid of the Turks, send them back to Turkey. And then she decided to make 2 things into one. Got rid of these people on those islands that were a bother to her. They had to walk down there. It took them 8 months to walk, but they came there in 1781. And they made their village there, continuing speaking Swedish. And they even had stamps that were Swedish, and they had a clergyman was sent from Sweden to their church all through these years. It's like a miracle. And I thought it was so touching. And then when the war broke out in Ukraine, I sort of tried to follow what's happening to these people who lived there. And it's so tragic that Russia took the area on the eastern side of the river Dnieper, and the village, the Swedish village, was just on the west side. And they kept shooting, and there's nothing left. No. The last thing I heard is that there are 70 elderly people who live in where they kept potatoes, you dig into the earth and make like a little shed for potatoes, because there's not a single house that is still standing upright. And I can't help thinking about them. And I thought, our king and queen really made an effort also to say in their New Year's speech that they give on the TV for all people, don't forget our friends, Swedish-speaking friends in South Ukraine. Yeah. And I've been there when it was there, and now it's nothing.
I was in a similar size village a year ago, south of Kharkiv, that was completely leveled. Maybe 4,000 people lived there before, and now only a handful had come back because it was completely destroyed. Not a single house was still untouched. So, it's horrible.
Don't you think as travelers it's our responsibility to get through the filter and actually explain what's really going on?
Yep.
Because I think oftentimes we have some insights that others don't.
Yeah. And that's exactly why I went there on this Nomad Mania trip a year ago, in a country in the middle of a full-scale war, and people said, why do you need to do that? And I felt I have a platform with the podcast, and also I wanted to be a part of showing my support to the Ukrainian people. And we took precautions, so I wouldn't go right now because it's escalated. But you're absolutely right, Jeff. It's our responsibility to go and see it and talk about it.
Right, yeah. That's certainly been my experience more than once. The actual sort of impression that you may have from the media is not really what's going on in the location.
Exactly.
I mean, I think that's true. Forever that's been true when I see how women are treated in particular countries. And that's true with education. It's true with so many things.
Mm-hmm. We're almost out of time, but I have one question that I'd like all of you to see if you can answer. Was there a moment where you thought, this is why I travel? This is what it's all about? Jeanette?
For some reason, Mongolia comes to mind. And we had gone there to do a project. We were building some houses. And we went out and lived with some nomads for a few days. And I took a little hike up onto a mountain.
We're not talking digital nomads here.
So anyway, just on that mountain, I just felt like, this is it. This is the reason. And I often think about, and I'll say to myself, it's all about that mountain. Because that sort of made me think, this is okay, and I want to continue doing this.
Yeah. Do you have a mountain, Jeff?
A mountain.
Or a point?
Well, I guess I do. The last trip that really sort of made an impression on me was at the end of almost the end of the pandemic. We decided to go to Yemen, and we went to Socotra, and there's no infrastructure for tourism there whatsoever. So we slept on beaches and did a lot of hiking. And resources were also very limited, and I thought, and also the return flight was one big question mark. And I thought, these are the things that I need to experience that keep me humble and make me understand that everywhere that I go has value. And people will often say, well, what's your favorite place to travel? And I usually say home, because I like everywhere I go. And it's usually the last place that I've been. I'll say, and I loved it, you know. But I'm increasingly disturbed by the land grabs that I see going on. I went to Svalbard this year, which, as you know, is way north in Norway. And Norway lays claim to Svalbard, but the Swedes called it Spitsbergen, and they laid claim to it when Sweden had auspices over Norway. And they issued mineral rights to the Russian court as a favor, so that they could access the coal in the islands. And now Putin has discovered that the Russians have a claim to the islands,
and
he has raised a flag over the old Russian settlement. And so the Russians have made a pronouncement that historically, Spitsbergen, which is Svalbard today, has Russian roots, and it was granted to them by the Swedish Imperial Court. But it wasn't. It was just the mineral rights. But he's recently done the same thing with Alaska. He's made a claim and said that Alaska is historically Russian.
It was, that's right. But the story is that Russia tried, before they sold it to the U.S., they were trying to sell it to Liechtenstein. So Alaska could have been Liechtenstein, which would have made that country a little bit bigger than it is.
That's true.
Yeah.
And Alaska was also on the list as a Jewish home state after the war.
Yeah.
Alaska was listed as one of the places that...
And then again, back in the Viking days, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, it was all Denmark. So should we say, okay, come home and be Denmark again?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
But you know as well as I do that those are all fantasy land grabs, and really people don't have an association with the country that's making the grab.
No,
and it just seems to want to brew up trouble.
Yeah, we should all settle things like Canada and Denmark did with Hans Island, the little rock between Greenland and Canada. Nobody lives there, and then all of a sudden, Canada put a bottle of Canadian whiskey and planted a flag saying, "Welcome to the Canadian island." And Denmark said, "Well, this is a Danish island or a part of Greenland." So they planted a Danish flag, took the bottle and put a bottle of aquavit from Denmark saying, "Thank you for the drink, here's one from us." And by the way, welcome to the Danish island.
Yeah.
And that went on forever, for 20 or 30 years. And finally, just recently, they made a line so that's now divided. This, basically a rock, 500 meters in diameter, is now half Canadian and half part of the Danish kingdom. That's how you should settle things.
Well, exactly. I agree. And you know, benignly, with some agreement with, you know, swapping Aquavit for Canadian Club if you want to.
Yeah. I have one more question. Has any of you ever nearly run over a former U.S. president?
Yes. The answer is yes.
The answer is yes, from the bicycle genius.
We weren't bicycling at the time. We were in South Africa doing a Habitat for Humanity build, and it was a Jimmy Carter build. And at that time, it was a group of people building 100 houses in 1 week in Durban, South Africa. And I had a broken wrist and a sprained wrist, so I was wearing braces on my hands, and I couldn't actually build, but I volunteered to drive a bucky, which is what they call their little pickup trucks. And it was a 5 on the floor. I had to drive on the left side of the road, and my job was to drive through this construction site, and then I had people in the back who were delivering water and ice and lunches. So one day I was backing up the bucky, and a man with a little speaker in his ear and the vest with all the pockets and came up to me, and he had a very Georgian Southern accent and said, ma'am, you might want to stop because you're about to run over former President Carter. And I was backing up. Meanwhile, President Carter was walking toward me on the same street. Well, not even a street, but on the same road. And that's my story of how I almost ran over President Carter. But thankfully, I mean, he's 100 years old today, so it didn't happen.
Yes, thank you. No.
Yeah, thank you. He survived. And thank you to all of you for taking the time. I know some of you have just arrived and are tired and want to rest up. So thank you so much. And
thank you.
We're going to enjoy meeting you all again at the conference.
Thank you.
This conversation was recorded in Bangkok just before the Extraordinary Travel Festival, an event that brought together some of the world's most fascinating travelers. Over the course of my days in Bangkok, I had a chance to sit down with people who have explored places and lived experience that'll blow your mind. And if interviews aren't your thing, don't worry, I'm also working on my regular travel episodes, which I will continue to drop alongside these festival conversations. In the next interview episodes, I'll be sitting down with Randy Williams, or as some people might know him, R-Dub. He's a radio veteran, the man behind a global radio phenomenon, Sunday Night Slow Jams. And, oh yeah, he's also the self-proclaimed Sultan of Slowjamistan.
We have some very strict laws in Slowjamistan. You may have heard that Crocs, the shoes, strictly forbidden. Well, let me tell you, you don't want to get caught with Crocs in Slowjamistan.
We'll hear about his fascinating journey from being a 15-year-old DJ to someone who's traveled to every single country in the world. And of course, his hilarious and unique project, creating his own micronation, Slowjamistan.
Well, you know, when you finish seeing every country in the world, all 193 countries, you have to make your own. So that was that's the headline. I decided to make my own country.
That episode is full of stories, laughs, and a glimpse into a truly extraordinary life. So don't you dare miss it. My name's Palabo, and I gotta keep moving. See ya.
Produced by RadioGuru.co.uk.